We're going to do a little segment on heart blocks at Club Ventricular. Just going to have a little bit of fun with this since some people are having trouble understanding the difference between the second degree blocks and the third degree block or the complete heart block. Hopefully this might help you to remember. So if you remember, we talked about the whole issue of conduction. And conduction is where everything is happening. So every tracing that you see on the EKG paper is due to some electrical or not some activity electrical wise in the heart. So normally we know it starts in the SA node, and we get that. It comes out of there, travels down, gets into our AV node, and that's where we have a little bit of a slowdown. So it slows down there basically so we have time for the ventricles to fill up and get ready to go. So what happens is the atria contract, the AV node slows things down, gives the ventricles time to fill up. Then it follows down through and down into our ventricles where we have the contraction and we see the rest of our heartbeat. So when we have our atria contracting, we have our P wave. When we get down into the ventricles is when our QRS complex happens. So let's take a look now at what's going on. So we're going to do club ventricle. So we're going to think of that AV node as the door into the club, and here's our bouncer. Okay, so our AV node is going to be our bouncer. So let's just try to remember this little scenario, and we're going to have a little bit of fun with this and see if this will help you to remember the different blocks. Okay, so our second degree block type 1. What's happening, if you remember, is you're seeing a progressive lengthening of that PR interval. So think of your AV node as the door. So here's the door into the club. So we're going to get into the club and our bouncer's there and the door is pretty much open. So we're going to have, what we think of as a pretty regular beat going on. So we're, coming down, the electrical impulse is coming down. We get another one and we have a P wave, but that door is starting to close a little bit. So it's taking a little bit longer to get through. So we start to see that lengthen. So we go down to our next beat, and again we have a P wave, but that door is really, really tight, so it's hard to get through, so it gets a little longer yet. Then we get down here and the door is closed. So we're going to have a dropped QRS complex. So if you think of that second degree type 1, the door's partway open, the door's starting to shut, so this is getting longer. Door's even tighter, trying to squeeze through, so your PRI gets longer, and then the door is shut, and you're going to drop a complex. So that's your second degree type. So if we take a look at the strip that we have here, you'll notice there's your interval, and you have a short one, a little bit longer, and you drop. So the door has closed. Door's open, a little bit more closed, a lot more closed, and you're going to drop one over here. So again, that's your second degree type 1. Now things start to get a little bit crazier when we get into the second degree type 2. So when we're talking about our second degree type 2, we have our bouncer, and he's there at Club Ventricular, and he really likes P waves. So he likes P waves. So P waves are going to get through that door pretty regularly. He will let a couple come through the door every once in a while. So if you think of your couple as your entire P wave of the QRS complex, then that's what you're going to think of getting through every now and then. But remember, the bouncer at the door likes P waves, so he's going to let those go through pretty regularly. So let's take a look at this now. So here's your couple, and you'll notice that we have, our complex there. And there's your P wave, there's your QRS complex. Now, each couple that gets through this door has a consistent PR interval. So if you look at the ones that are noted here, you will see that each time there's a couple, that interval is consistent. That is really important in figuring out the difference between your second degree type 2 and your complete heart block or your third degree block. Now you notice more P waves got through because the bouncer likes P waves. Okay, he likes the P's, so look at all the P's that get through. All right, now remember we have a different ventricular rate and a different atrial rate. So if we count our ventricular rate, we're looking at our R to R. And how many do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So our ventricular rate is 50. Our atrial rate, however, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is 80. So you're going to have a difference in those rates, and that's how you count them. Okay? So remember, if you're doing a second degree type 2, each couple that gets into club ventricular has a consistent PRI, and more P waves get through than couples. Okay, so third degree or complete heart block. Well, when you want to get into club ventricular, at this point, the door is locked. So our bouncer is not letting anybody in, not letting anybody out. So we're having two separate parties going on at this point in time. So it's almost like looking at two separate EKGs that are put into one strip. So remember, when you've got the third degree or complete heart block, the door is locked, it's closed, no one's getting through. So if we take a look at this, here we have our bouncer, and he's got his arms crossed now, and he's saying no one's getting into club ventricular and nobody's getting out. So on one side, we have our P waves. On the other side, we have our QRS complexes. So what's happening here is we have our atria working, we have our ventricles working, but they're working at their own speed, they're dancing to their own music, okay? So our P waves are usually dancing a whole lot faster than our QRS complex. And we know that because when we start with our SA node, it's a much faster rate. When the ventricles are providing that impulse, it's a much slower rate. Look at a strip. So each one is doing their own thing. There's absolutely no association. So you remember the P waves are outside dancing by themselves. So here we have them. And we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So our atrial rate, or our P to P, is going to be 80. Our ventricular rate, 1, 2, 3, is much slower. So our R to R is a whole lot slower. And again, remember, there's absolutely no association going on here. Now you might say, but wait a minute, here's a P wave with a QRS complex. Well, that's true. But what did we remember about the second degree type 2? Every time we have a couple, they have a consistent PRI. So we don't have any more couples going on in this strip. So that's our first clue that there's nothing going on there. So that's an accidental P wave before the QRS complex. It doesn't have anything to do with conducting that beat. So if you look at what you have there, you have your consistent P's coming all the way across, and you have your consistent R to R. So that's what we're looking at, two totally different things. This one just happens to fall in front of a QRS complex. So hopefully that will help you a little bit if you remember about club ventricular and our bouncer either opening the door or closing the door. And remember, he likes P waves, so more P waves get through than QRS complexes. And every now and again, on a second degree type 2, he allows a couple to get through, and we have that association. So hopefully that helped.